Our next guest is a man who epitomizes public service. He served his country, first as an Air Force officer during the Vietnam War, and later as one of our most respected national leaders. In 2007, Time magazine listed him as one of that year's most influential people. The following year, he was named as one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report. A Washington Post book review said he is, and I quote, widely considered the best defense secretary of the post-World War II era, unquote. As you are about to hear from his award citation, that is just one of the many jobs he excelled at. He has earned a Presidential Medal of Freedom, and I am proud to say he is also a member of American Legion Post 110 in Lacey, Washington. It is my distinct pleasure to present the 2017 American Legion Patriot Award to Dr. Robert M. Gates, former U.S. Secretary of Defense.
The American Legion Patriot Award presented to Dr. Robert M. Gates for stalwart service and leadership to America as an officer in the U.S. Air Force, as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, as President of Texas A&M University, as the 22nd U.S. Secretary of Defense, as President of the Boy Scouts of America, and as Chancellor of the College of William & Mary. You have demonstrated the highest level of integrity and excellence throughout your career. Your service to both Republican and Democratic administrations demonstrated a commitment that transcends partisan politics. Your reminder to European allies that they have a responsibility to live up to the defense requirements as a member of NATO struck a chord that still resonates today. You maintain a seat as a valued member of the American Legion 100th Anniversary Honorary Committee. Your advocacy for and service to U.S. military, veterans, public servants, and the young people of America epitomize the four pillars upon which the American Legion was founded. On behalf of the 2 million members of the American Legion, we thank you for your patriotism and service to America.
Thank you very much for this honor. It is humbling to be recognized with this Patriot Award by the American Legion. I last stood before you on August 31st, 2010, when, as Secretary of Defense, I spoke at your national convention in Milwaukee. I told you then that it was a real pleasure to be with you, but that it was a real pleasure to be anywhere but Washington, D.C. Much has happened in the last 7 years, but that hasn't changed. First of all, I want to thank you for all the American Legion has done for our nation and for our military, and especially for those returning from the battlefield. When I was asked in October of 2006 if I would be willing to serve as Secretary of Defense, I said that because all those kids were out there doing their duty, I had no choice but to do mine. The troops were the reason I took the job, and they were the reason I stayed. Being called the Soldier's Secretary because I cared so much about them was the highest compliment imaginable. The tone for my tenure as Secretary of Defense was unexpectedly set in an encounter in Washington, D.C. prior to my confirmation hearings. I was having dinner alone in a hotel dining room when a middle-aged woman came up to my table and asked if I were Mr. Gates, the new Secretary of Defense. I said I was. She congratulated me, and then with tears in her eyes, said, "I have 2 sons serving in Iraq. For God's sake, bring them home alive." Our wars suddenly became very real to me, along with the responsibility I was taking on for all those in the fight. It only took a few visits to the frontline troops in Iraq and Afghanistan before I began to feel a deep emotional attachment to them, a growing feeling that I personally was responsible for each of them. I soon was telling the troops on the front lines that I had come to regard them as though they were my own sons and daughters, and that I would do everything in my power to get them the equipment they needed to accomplish their mission and to come home safely, and if wounded, to ensure they got the best care in the world. What I didn't expect was that I would have to fight the Pentagon bureaucracy itself to fulfill my pledge to those amazing young people whose selfless service and sacrifice contrasted so vividly with so many self-serving elected and non-elected officials back home. There will always be a special place in my heart for all those who served on the front lines in Iraq and Afghanistan, most in their 20s, some in their teens. During World War II, General George Marshall once told his wife, "I cannot afford the luxury of sentiment. Mine must be cold logic. Sentiment is for others." Such icy detachment was never an option for me. Because of the nature of the wars I oversaw, I could afford the luxury of sentiment, and at times it nearly overwhelmed me. It wasn't long before I had signed the orders deploying every single person in an American uniform to Iraq and Afghanistan. Every single soldier, Marine, airman, and sailor who was wounded or killed was in harm's way because I sent him there. Determined never to let the fallen become statistics for me, I asked that every condolence letter I had to write be accompanied by a photo of the individual, along with hometown news stories so I could read what his parents and brothers and sisters or spouse or coaches or friends had to say, so I could know whether he'd been an athlete, an honor student, or had been aimless and found direction in life through military service. I wanted to know each of them as I hand-wrote the condolence letter. I came to believe, as so many of you have long known from personal experience, that no one who had actually been in combat could walk away without scars, some measure of post-traumatic stress. And while the wounded troops I visited in the hospitals put on a brave front for me, in my mind's eye, I could see them lying awake, alone in the hours before dawn, confronting their pain, their broken dreams, and their shattered lives. I would wake in the night and think back to a Marine or a soldier I had seen at Landstuhl or Bethesda or Walter Reed. And in my imagination, I would put myself in his hotel room, his hospital room, and I would hold him to my chest and comfort him. And so my answer to a young soldier's question in Afghanistan about what kept me awake at night, he did. My wars are over, but for all of you who have served and fought, for the wounded and their families, for the families of the fallen, our nation's wars will continue for the rest of their lives. Thanks to the American Legion, we will never forget what they did and what they sacrificed. And we will never forget what you did and what you sacrificed. Thank you again for this honor.